All right, everybody. Welcome to this month's FM Academy session. Today we're going to be learning about visual design basics and how they apply to you as a FileMaker developer. The goal of this presentation is to educate developers on visual design basics and to empower them to create professional apps. So let's get right into it. This is the FM Academy. The FM Academy is a consortium of 8 FileMaker Platinum level FBA members spread across the United States. They're working together to bring education and standards to the FileMaker development community with monthly webinars available for free. In addition to these webinars, there's also an archive of recorded sessions that are available on the YouTube channel. Throughout this presentation, if you have a question, please type it into the webinar console. I'll do my best to answer as many questions as I can at the end. And if I don't get to your question, please feel free to send it to fba@dbservices.com, and we'll be happy to answer it afterwards. So let's talk about the topics. I'm going to go over visual design principles and creative. Oh, I think I skipped the slide. My bad. All right, let me first introduce myself. I am an application developer and user experience designer here at DB Services. I'm certified in the last 4 versions of FileMaker, and I've been working in FileMaker for over 7 years. I have a bachelor's degree in digital art, and yeah, when I was at school, I was pretty much doing a lot of digital art and FileMaker all through college. So I have a deep history in both and a passion for anything that's related to digital art and design. I work for DB Services, and we are a FileMaker Platinum partner. We're a member of the FM Academy, obviously, and then we are a global presence across the world in Canada, Europe, Africa, Asia. Our team is mostly focused on adding value for our customers. That's our big goal. You can read more about it on our website. We've had articles that are featured in the FileMaker newsletter, and if you want updates when we post articles, we typically do it every month, sometimes more frequently. You can follow our Twitter handle @dbservices, and you'll get notifications every time. All right. So as I was saying, we're going to cover the basic visual design principles that apply to all areas of visual design, and then I'm going to specifically talk about how to apply these to user experience and user interface as a FileMaker developer. The other thing I'm going to look at is creative solutions to complex interface challenges that I face every day and that I think could help out other developers. I'll look at common pitfalls that I see a lot in FileMaker solutions and how to avoid them. And then I'll take a look at some real interfaces from work that I've done and kind of break it down and go into how to improve and build on existing interfaces. So without further ado, let's jump into our first principle, and that's color. This is the first thing you may notice, and I want to mention 4 things that color does. The first thing is that it aids in navigation by directing the viewer's eye and drawing their attention to areas of high contrast and high color. The second thing that it does is it describes an action. So if you give something a color, it can be very descriptive of what that button or area of the system is going to do. Typically, if something is red, it's a problem. All right, I got a couple questions coming in that the audio is not good, so I will do my best to speak a bit slower, and hopefully that will resolve any issues. All right, so the third thing that color does is it tells the story of data. You can use color to describe what's happening to the data. If you have a lot of profit, you can use green or something positive to indicate that the numbers are good, or obviously you could use red to indicate numbers are low, etc. All right, I'm getting a lot of questions in here. Audio is good, audio is bad, so I'm just going to plow ahead, and if your audio is dropping out, it should be clear and crisp in the recording. All right, so the fourth thing that color does is it sets mood and context, and sometimes it can even set culture. And I'll go into how you can tailor that in a little bit. First, let's talk about the next principle, which is value. Value is not the same as color, and I think a lot of people get this confused. A color has a value, and every color has different values. So you see here I have these two wheels. The one on the left is the color, and the one on the right represents the value that each color has. So you see yellow at the top has a very light value, and in contrast, purple at the bottom is close to a very dark, almost black kind of color. So you use color to create contrast. If you put two colors with the same value next to each other, you're going to create visual noise, even if the colors are polar opposites of each other. If they're the same value, you're not going to have good contrast, and your application is going to strain the eyes. So you're all familiar with the inspector. It's you use this every day to specify what color you want something to be. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, but you actually have this little hash over here of hex colors, and that is the hex value of the color that you have selected. So what is hex? I used to think I've used digital software for the longest time, and I used to think it was some magical hash that every color was assigned a hash, and I knew that white was FFFFF and black was 00000, but like beyond that, I didn't really know or even spend time to figure out what these colors mean. But I think that if you know what they are, it can actually help you a lot. So it's not a magical hash. It's actually a breakdown of your red, green, and blue values. So RGB is very popular. It's what FileMaker uses it, and most applications use it. So what the way that the hash works is the left two digits are red, the middle two are green, and the right two are blue. And there's a tens place for each color and a ones place. And it works similar to how a deck of cards works. So it starts at 0, which is the lowest value. And if there's 0, there's none of that color. So none of any color is black. And you can count up to 9, and then beyond that, you can go to A, B, C, D, E, and F. So just like a deck of cards, once it gets past 10, it goes to Jack, Queen, King, Ace. These numbers, they keep counting up to F so that you can fit 16 digits in each place. That allows you to get the full range of color gamut, and that's how hex works. So I'll show you a little hands-on how to manipulate that and use it to your advantage because it can be really helpful. Before I do that, I want to talk about the goal here, and the goal is to make the colors relevant to your client. Always ask, when starting on a new project, always ask if the client has a visual identity document, which could talk about their logos and their color themes and what they look for their own branding to keep things consistent. If they have that, it can save you a lot of work as a designer and make your job really easy, and then make the app appeal to your client. If they don't have a visual identity document, that's totally fine. You can reference their website or their logo for colors that they may feel represent them. And then if all else fails, you can search for a palette online, and there's lots of resources that give great palettes that work together and keep things simple and clear, and you can just build off of those. Just always bear in mind that when working in FileMaker, you're not building a web page, you're building a solution. So try to make it cohesive and efficient. So I'm going to get into my first demo now, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about those hex colors. So here's my demo file. Here I have a gray background, like you may have a neutral. It's kind of easy on the eyes. And then I have these two colors I'm trying to work with, and I have their hex values here for reference. It's very hard to see, and I would be surprised if you guys can actually see these colors well on the recording, because like I talked about, their value is very, very close to that gray. So there's very low contrast with these two colors. And what you can do if you want to preserve the exact color that maybe the client's given you or you think is appropriate, you can take the tens place and subtract from each red, green, and blue the same number of digits. So in this case, I'm going to go down from F to A, so that would be about 5 digits. And I just for my own reference, I copied the value that I actually want this color to be into the second field. So let me take this, and if I take certain number off of each of these, you see I get the exact same color, but the value has gone down. It's the same mix of red, green, and blue, so it appears the same, but it's much, much better contrast in this scenario. So let me run through that one more time. I have this little pastel yellow, and if I change this one to darker hex value of each color, you see I get the same yellow, but again, the hex has gone down. So if I go back into browse mode, you can see there's much greater contrast. You can actually read these letters now for these two fields, and yet I use the same colors. Now, this isn't foolproof. As you see, I got this kind of muddy green almost for the yellow. So I might pursue using the color wheel to make that a little more interesting, a little less like split pea soup. But it can work really well if you're trying to make a value scale, or you just want something to be slightly lighter. When you hover over it, you can increase those hex values, etc. Just to give you a couple more examples of how color can clash. These two colors are very, very close together in value. And if you look at your screen, you should see like it's almost like vibrating between the two lines of the color. Your eye has trouble differentiating that line, even though the colors are so saturated and bright and different. The values are the same, so it makes the eyes hurt if you stare at it. So that's what you want to avoid. And if I go to this other one, here's another example with a gray and then a bright color it's bright color. It should contrast really well with gray, but it's too vibrant and it's too much of the same value, so that it really hurts the eyes. All right, so let me hop into a couple of really good resources that you can find online. The first one is Adobe Color. If you're struggling with your color palette, or you have a website or maybe a business card from the client and you're trying to extract the colors from it and make a meaningful palette, Adobe Color can really, really help you out. So it's this website by Adobe. They make Photoshop and Illustrator, for those of you who don't know. And you can go in here and play with color palettes. They have some default ones. They have different settings. But the really cool thing about this is you can choose an image. And if I pick an image, so I'm going to pick, let's see, I have this business card from this fake client. Let's say he's a piano services tuner. If I open this up, you see Adobe Color immediately picks out the main colors on this image. And this one's really basic. There's just a couple, but it does really well with even more complex images, even a photo with a bunch of colors in it. It'll pick out the ones that are most prominent and tell you, and then organize them for you here by their prominence. And you can then use those as your color palette. So if you don't like the one that it selected, again, there's more options. So you can check bright, muted, deep, dark, and you can kind of play with this. And it can really save you a lot of time trying to pick the color. So I definitely recommend that. If that's not your taste or your client didn't give you anything to go off of, I would recommend going to a site like this, colorhunt.co. They post new appealing color palettes every single day. You see this one's posted today, 2 days ago, 3 days ago. And you can kind of just scroll through. They have months of archives, and just go for a color theme that you feel like fits your needs, and then build off of it. And these colors have already been picked out by a designer, and they should work really well together. So that's my best advice on color. Going back to Adobe Color, once we've done this, something we might end up with really quickly is a screen like this. So you see I've taken those colors that Adobe Color mentioned, and I just kind of threw them on my FileMaker objects. And I got a really appealing screen without a whole lot of effort. So in this case, this was from a real project I worked on. We had a very small budget, and we're just trying to knock out something that looked decent, worked well, which I imagine is most projects for most people. So if you use that to your advantage, then you can get that done and add value without inflating the budget for a lot of interface. So let's move on. Let's talk about the next principle, line. Line is all over the place in user interface. It's used to create structure, firstly, and then secondly, it also directs the viewer's eye. Naturally, our eyes will find lines and follow them. If there's an arrow, it'll definitely point you off into that direction. And then secondly, line can also divide and group objects, and you want to use that to your advantage. Bear in mind that lines are not only like line objects in FileMaker. edges and things that line up well will create a line for you, and you always need to keep those in mind. So this is what you don't want to do. you want to line things up. Please line things up. This is a very common pitfall to not be precise in this. Obviously, this is an extreme example, but if you don't have the lines of your application lined up, if you have these fields that are like not in alignment, if you have different widths and lengths for everything, then your app is going to look very, very amateur, and there will not you won't get that professional feel you're going for. Do not catch me making this. Do not let me catch you making this screen. I will come find you. So my best advice here is be exact. Use the inspector to your advantage. It has the position here. It has alignment tools. You can use these to get everything in alignment really quickly, really easily. And then secondly, pay attention to cross-screen alignment. So it's not just about what looks good on the current screen, but if you go from one screen to another screen that looks almost the same, but some objects shift a little bit, then or the lines change, then people are going to see that, and it's going to kind of break their trust in the application. So just as a quick demo, if you look at this in the top left, if you look at where I have line as the title header, on the previous slide, you see it's a pixel off. So if I flip between these really quickly, you see like I moved it 1 pixel, and everybody sees that animation. It feels like it's animated, it's moving, it's like it's not anchored together. And you always want to avoid that. So if you have two things that are the same, make sure that they're on the same position on the screen on both different screens. Use the inspector. You can't go wrong. Space is very similar to line. It creates structure, and it directs the viewer's eye. And it also really almost even more than line, it divides and groups objects. So you see I have these 3 little buttons down here, and the 2 on the right seem somewhat related because they have less space between them. So you can use this in your application to kind of train the user on what things are related and what things aren't. So if something's way off on its own, it's not going to feel like it's related to the other 2 things that are together. So really pay attention to the relationships these create, and notice how if you just shift it a little bit, your whole relationship changes. So you see I move that button up, and suddenly the buttons on the bottom are related, and now this other little spaceship is kind of floating off by his own, and he seems really has nothing to do with the other 2 because the lines are different, he's in a different plane on the screen, everything's changed. So always bear that in mind. Just like line, make sure that you don't leave spaces different. You want the space to be consistent between the objects are the same. So you see this button bar that I have up here. Every different button has different space between them. It looks really unprofessional. It just hurts. It just hurts, and it makes the application, again, it just makes it look amateur. So avoid that, and just like with line, be exact. Use the position on the inspector. Use the arrange and align. Make sure the spaces between things are exactly the same, because your everyday user will notice, and it's very likely it'll bug the heck out of them if they have to use that screen every day. So the next principle I want to talk about is shape. My best advice here is just pay attention to shape. Some shapes create visual stability, like squares or rounded squares, which we work with a lot in FileMaker and interface design in general. There's a lot of those, and they create the structure for the interface. And this allows other shapes to indicate action. So circles, triangles, you don't see a lot of those, but if you use them sparingly, they can create action in the image and draw the viewer's eye, let them know that something will happen if I click on that circle rather than the square. So in the same category as shape, there's symbols. Symbols are basically compact labels, and you can use these sparingly. You can use them with or without text. If you have really good symbols, you don't even need to describe them to the user. They'll know what they do. If you have a little email button, if you have a little chat button like I have here, you know that that's going to send a message to somebody. So you can really use that to your advantage to reduce the text on the screen and keep things simple. I have a couple honorable mentions for visual principles. I didn't feel like these warranted their own slide. We have typography. Just use something professional, something you like. Use Helvetica. I don't care. Make it look good, but there's not a whole lot to say there. when it comes to interface design. I would advise not using texture at all because just where design is at today, it's really it's all about flat. It's all about anti-skeuomorphism, which it just means skeuomorphism is basically interfaces that look like real life. So right now, modern design is really trending away from that. And if you want your app to look modern and not out of date, then go ahead and try not to use texture at all, or use it very, very sparingly and in not very many areas. Form is kind of how things take up space in 3D. Interface is really a 2D practice, and so there's not a lot to say about form when it comes to interface design. All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about complex interface challenges. When it comes to interface, there's two kinds of complexity. There's unnecessary complexity, which is usually created by amateur designers or designers who are in a hurry, or you just don't think about it. You gotta meet the deadline. You just throw things together. You can end up with a lot of unneeded complexity and unnecessary complexity. I don't really want to talk about that. What I want to talk about is necessary complexity, which we have because life is complex, and you are making an interface which is going to represent part of, or most of, or all of a business, and businesses get really complex. So your users are going to have to do complex actions, and as such, your app may need to have complex areas. So with all that in mind, the way I like to think about it is that necessary complexity is a constant. If you have to have it, then it has to be there somewhere. And you can either have it so that the user has to go through a bunch of complex hoops and hurdles and do a whole bunch of complex things, or you can translate that to kind of under the hood and make the app really smart and user-friendly. Just bear in mind that there's a trade-off there, because you're going to end up doing a lot more development. Your app is going to seem a lot more complex when you get into the nuts and bolts of it. But you'll end up with a quality app that is really easy to use. So there's always a trade-off there, and you can't really compromise either way. So I'll show you examples of FileMaker complexity going under the hood in a little bit here. But before I do that, I want to talk about goal-oriented user interface. Always keep in mind that the user is not trying to use your app. They're trying to accomplish a goal. The better and faster they can do this, the more efficient they can be at their job. And ultimately, they're trying to do their job, and you're trying to make that efficient and effective. So always bear that in mind when you're developing, and try to think about the goal you're going for, not the the technicals of what you're trying to develop. So, for example, a goal could be they're trying to record an order, and your job is to make that as easy as possible, as fluent as possible, set up tab orders so it goes through quickly, that kind of thing. As a developer, you may be sucked into thinking that their goal is to save a contact, but really the user's goal is to access that contact later. And if you think about it that way, it kind of changes how you might design your CRM or your contact database to allow the users to quickly access their contacts after they've entered them, because entering them is just one step. What you really need out of CRM is the access later. In a similar fashion, your user's not ever trying to run a report. They're trying to view the data. So always keep that in mind. Always try to present your reports as concisely as possible so that the data they need is at the forefront. When you're developing for goal orientation, the best thing you can do is to keep separate ideas in separate spaces. Now, I don't say separate screens, because in FileMaker you can have a given screen or layout, and then you could have spaces that are kind of nested or separated inside of that. But you want to keep each goal in its own place, in its own screen or in its own area of the screen. And you also want to allow the user simple ways to get to different goals. So the user, their goals and where they're trying to go is simpler than speech. I mean, as an example, if you're trying to use your phone, oftentimes it feels almost cumbersome to pull out even Siri and tell her what you want, because there's that extra language barrier there. Their goal, they're gonna know what their goal is before they even think about it. So you want to make simple ways to get to different goals without having to go through unrelated goals or areas or spaces that that just kind of distract and take away. So let's talk about practical ways to do these things. The first thing I like to always caution people is say no to the layout menu. FileMaker by default shows you your layouts in a drop-down list. It's very long, and it's very useful in layout mode as a developer, but for the user, this isn't a solution to navigation. And the reason for this is that the menu gets really, really long as soon as you have, a decent amount of screens. So this is a screenshot from a real system, and we have quite a few layouts. And you see that even on Windows, it's also not sustainable because after 256, there's actually a hard cap, and they will just you won't be able to navigate to them in layout mode, and the list will kind of get really long and wonky down here. So it's not a great place. On top of that, the user has to, instead of focusing on a goal, they have to switch into alphabetical mode and figure out, or however you organize these, to figure out where their layout was. And actually, in most cases, I see a lot of these that aren't even alphabetical organized. They're like organized by somebody's priority, and then they're just you have to memorize which little subfolder your layout that you need is in, and it's really a terrible user experience. So the answer, in my opinion, is top-tier navigation. I call it top-tier navigation. You could have side-tier navigation that also works. But the idea is that the main areas of your system are broken out into these tiers, and you can pick what module or what workflow you want to go to just by tapping at the top. So I have an example here of desktop, kind of a generic desktop top tier. We have dashboard, context, quotes, those kind of things. Or down at the bottom, I have an iPhone interface with, where I've instead of putting words, I've just put symbols, and the user learns what these are, these different things for the app that they're using, and it can be really clear to them really fast. So always focus on efficient goal switching. My second tip for complex interface is typically you want to avoid using a creation row portal in FileMaker. Now, this may come as a surprise to a lot of people. There is a benefit to using the creation row for certain tasks. Namely, if you're doing fast data entry, like on an order screen, you're just trying to enter line items, the creation row can really be your friend. But in a lot of places, it gets really clunky scrolling all the way to the bottom if there's a lot of related items, and then you can kind of work around this. You can make a button that takes you to the bottom every time you want to add one, but that also kind of ruins the user inertia, and it kind of throws them there, and they might get lost as to what's happening. And so there's a lot of other things that you want to consider using instead of just throwing a portal at a screen. The first one of these is very popular in a lot of development circles, is the Selector. This basically pulls up all the related data, and you can have filters at the top here where you type, and then you can just click on a row and it adds it as a related item. This is really easy to use. It's really intuitive. The only downside, and I'm going to demo this in a little bit, so for those of you who don't know what this is, just bear with me for a few more slides, and then we'll talk about how exactly this works. But this really can only be used if there's related data that already exists. So just keep that in mind. Something I personally like to do is it's like a simple selector. You just have one global field or maybe two, and you have a little popover, and you can have them pick from a list and then add it. So in this case, you're adding related teams to maybe a user record, and you pick from the teams available and you add them, and it's as simple as that. But if you get a bunch of related records, the user doesn't have to deal with the creation row. This is something that is really simple and easy to use for the user, but more complex for the developer. I call this Modal Entry. I find myself using this more and more because just for the user experience for this, it's so nice to just have your goal right in the center here, and then everything else grayed out. It focuses you in, and the way this kind of works is you just have the background gets grayed out, you have the window you need pop up, and then you can type in data, and then they can save or cancel. Either way, if you have that save button there, that means you can do a really easy validation, make sure all the data is right before they continue or leave, and then if they can cancel if they're made any mistakes and they're doing an edit. So, all right, so let me demo how that works, and actually I'm going to go into how all three of those things work. So let's take a look at the creation row, what I was talking about. So here I have this system, just a kind of generic system again. We have some contacts here, and here I have notes for the contact. And you see down here at the bottom, there's a creation row. So if I want to add more notes, it does so. And then, oops, nope, but it's sorted, and then add more notes is up here at the top. I got to go back to the bottom to add a new note. So if I add another note, again, it goes to the top. I got to scroll back up, and you just see if this is built to handle 20, 30, 40 related records, it's going to get really old really fast to try to use that. So you got to come up with something better. Let's look at some examples of other options. Before I do that, though, I do want to talk about how the creation row can be good. So this is a quote, and I just want to type in these, these SKUs really fast, and you can have them like autocomplete based on user typing, and then tab, 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 tab. They can go through and they can enter in the next one, and they can go really fast at this, and it can be really, really good for saving time in data entry. So don't throw it out altogether, but just bear in mind that a lot of times you do need a better solution. So I'll demo the selector real quick. Click this button, it pops up the selector. You can see all my available products here. I've got a bunch of fancy sunglasses. So you could like filter as you type, so sunglasses, and you see it's just lightning fast. It goes as I type. I can kind of filter down, and I could have thousands of records here. This would just chop through them really fast and allow the user to pick the one they need and add it to the order. So I really recommend that if you do have a lot of related data like products to an order or something like that. And then lastly, let me talk about the modal entry. It looks kind of like this. So you click add as a user, and you get this little window that pops up, and you see it's kind of built in, and I can't click in the background. I can't hit escape. I just have this little window, and I'm focused in. It's like blinders on a horse. You can type in. So I got to fill out these fields, go through maybe payment terms. So in this case, I'm just entering like a payment, and then type in all this stuff, and then you click save, and it adds the related record right there. And then if I want to change that, I could go in here and I could edit it. I could add a check number, save that, and you see it's really, really nice for the user. They don't have to deal with the creation row or anything like that. And the best thing is they're focused in on their goal here. Everything else kind of gets grayed out. So just really quick, I'll break down how I did that. The way you kind of do this is you have to have a portal off or popover off to the right, and that popover houses your gray background. It's a gray background popover. It fills up this screen as big as you can. Make sure you anchor it to all corners of the screen so it resizes as they resize it. And then you can put your window, whatever you want here. You can kind of make this look however you want. And this is really great if you have a custom dialog or a wizard. You can have multiple of these chained together. You can kind of like pop one up and then pop the next up, if you have like a multi-step wizard that you need different screens for. I use this a lot. I use this all over the place. I have there's articles if you want to get into how to actually do it, or feel free to shoot me a couple questions and I can walk you through. So, but yeah, the main thing, just keep in mind, it's a popover off to the side, and then I also have a border just to make sure that it goes all the way to the edge. I have this border that hides and shows. So that's how that works. Let's get back into the presentation and talk about some real world examples. So I actually don't have a lot to present. I'm just going to switch over to my next demo. I'm going to look at some real client work and projects that I've worked on personally with existing interfaces, and then how to improve them. So for this, I'm actually going to pull out my iPad Pro. This is the latest and greatest from Apple, so that I can look at these screens and kind of mark them up with the pencil. So here I have this screen. I'm going to kind of walk you guys through how. Well, this screen needs no introduction. It is the king of too much information. This is an actual screen that I work with every day. Pretty much, this client is a great client. We work with them all the time, but they have this screen and it has every single button under the sun. They're neon colors. You got this up over here on the right. You have this whole bar of just like, it's basically like a cocktail bar of color and options and places to go, people to see. It gets crazy. You have this whole giant blue section, like this is related data. And then there's just like boxes everywhere, boxes, boxes, boxes. More, there's a whole nother like row of buttons. So believe it or not, the only goal here on this screen is to enter a product and its pricing information. So clearly there's a lot of complexity with the actual business case, but the screen itself is horrendous and could use a huge facelift. It would take a long time to make sure that you included all the functionality on this, but it is possible, and definitely something I would love to have the time to do sometime here in the future. But if this is what your screen looks like, you're doing it wrong. So let's hop over to something that's a little better. This is a interface. It looks pretty good. There's a lot going for this one, but it does have some issues. So, namely, the first thing, like, it has really small font size. It's hard to see here, but the font size on these fields is really small for the client. So it was hurting, like, you know, it was hard to read for older people. It was maybe straining people's eyes, and this system has a lot of users, so you definitely have to keep that in mind. The next beef I have with this screen is that the fields are really nondescript. Like, you have the label over here, and then you have the field, and it's really hard to see, like, oh, that's a field I'm supposed to type into, or oh, this over here is a field maybe I'm not supposed to type into. Like, they all look the same. It's not, the labels and the fields can be confused really easily. And then furthermore, these fields down here, these related records, these are really related records. And you have these fields that are like, they're hard to tell. Can I edit that field? Can I not? What happens if I click on the row? And you have this confusion going on. And then also there's some kind of like texture up here, which again, I'm not a fan of. And if you want your application to look modern, I would say you should probably not be a fan of it either. So we took this one and we did improve it. So here's kind of what we ended up with. I worked on this, it was about a year ago. So it is in the past, but it has a lot going for it. So you see, we cleaned up a lot of stuff. We changed the colors to match what the client needed. So this orange and this blue are their branding colors. A couple things here. I really focused on the alignment here between these buttons. That was a big thing. It makes it creates a lot of structure at the top of the screen, just to have those two bars in alignment with each other, and just make these, like, it does a lot just to make these lines line up with each other. On top of that, you have kind of some color here in the second function bar, showing that these are maybe they're not related to these the top tier nav up at the top, but they are buttons that I can click on as a user, and that sort of thing. So the other stuff we have is we have the labels were really split out from the field, and the field is then this white on this kind of gray background back here. So that really helps to let the user know, oh, the white is the fields. I can type in those fields. And then furthermore, just another little tip, I did bring out the main data in these bolded. It's the first field, it's bolded. These are the name of the customer and then the owner of the account. Those are the two main things that I need to see, and I made sure those were prominent. This also helps to make the related data seem not editable, because these fields aren't white. So you see here, I see that's not white. So I know I can't click in there. And I have this kind of blue-white alternating pattern just kind of built into FileMaker, and that makes it so I can see the rows really easily. And we were able to, one thing I did with this project to make the screen a little bigger is I made sure that I knew what the minimum screen size for the client was, and then I worked with that, instead of just assuming that some people have small screens, so make my solution really small. You can lose valuable real estate off to the side, like if you cut down how much screen you have, you lose all this stuff, and you could limit yourself as a developer. So always make sure you know what screen size you're working with. If you're working for an what kind of iPad you're working for, if you're doing an iPad, you know, if you're designing for an iPhone, obviously it's going to be a lot smaller. So yeah, before I go to my next client example, I do want to go back to my first demo file and show a little trick that I developed for this project. So you see that I have this button bar, and I have this little button pop effect. I just wanted to show people how to do this. Add a little bit of flair to your button bars in FileMaker 14. I developed this in 13, back before we had button bars, and the first thing I did when I got into 14 was make sure that I could still do it on a button bar. And lo and behold, the technique does work. It's very simple, and it kind of adds animation almost to your to your button bar. So you see here, if I hover, I get this pop, and if I click, it turns orange, and I would go to that module. So it's really simple. You just go into layout mode, and you look at it's all about the border of the button bar segment. So go to Appearance tab, go to your button bar segment, and then you can add a border. In this case, I did 4 points. So you want a kind of a thick border around it. And when it's inactive, you just want it to be clear, to be nothing, no fill. And then when you hover, you can give that border a color, which you can give the same color as the body, make those two colors match, and then it'll give you that hovering effect. So going back into browse mode, get that little pop. I really like it. Go ahead and use that in your applications if you like it too. So, all right, let's go back to my iPad and look at our next client. All right, so this one, we have the deep blue sea. This is a real screen as well as it is today. There's a lot of things going on with this screen. The main thing is the neon colors. Everybody notices we've got this neon green, we've got these reds, we've got neon green over here, neon green over here. It's just like makes the eye hurt. Not to mention all this just blue that's just like blasting out of the screen. So that's one thing that we need to address. We also have an issue here of really nested goal. It's almost nested goals. Like you have the top tier, sure, but then you have these tabs down here. We've got some more tabs and tabs here, and then we have tabs. These are tabs, and these are tabs inside of tabs over here on the right. So it's just getting insane, the navigation on this thing. And then you got all this text information that's like, not to mention the neon red. And on top of all this, there's like text everywhere, and you can't even read it. Like over here on the left, you can't read that black on blue. It's like there's no contrast there. And just lastly, I want to mention that these are actually, each of these is actually a button. All these are buttons. If you click on these are all buttons. This is not a radio button. It's actually buttons that shoot off a PDF and email. And as a user who's not used to the system, you wouldn't know that. So that's like a huge learning curve for people. So, and then I have this little like notification down here that's supposed to attract my eye after all of that neon color. So this one I started to redesign. It's a work in progress. So don't be too critical, but I did do some major things. I redesigned the blue, picked some better blues that work together. The client really wouldn't have anything else other than blue. No gray. He said gray looks like tofu, so no gray whatsoever. Got to use blue. So that's a big constraint for this, but you can still get rid of the neon colors, and I still have the same story of the data. Still using the green to indicate checked off my list, and then blue to indicate optional. And then we have bigger text, so it's easier to read. Made sure it was all good contrast with the background. And then on the left here, this bar, I really made sure that these appear as options for the user, these checkboxes. And on top of that, I moved all of that radio button set into a FileMaker 14 button bar with the glyphs, and I can just use the glyphs to tell the story. Like it says PDF right there. We got email, we got print, we got fax, we got share, and it's pretty obvious what that would be. So, and now when I do use a neon color, this red, it really draws the eye and makes me focus on, hey, I need to fill out this field. It's blank and it's red. I need to do something to make sure it turns green. So that's kind of what I did to improve this. There are still some issues. Obviously, I haven't completed it the right side of the screen. We still do have the tabs in tabs going on here. So more design is needed, more redesign, but it's a big step forward, and hopefully that helps some of you guys when you're looking at a screen that you know looks bad, but you don't really know what to do to it first. Okay, so lastly, I just want to pop back over to my presentation here and remind everybody that design is transitive. So everything is moving forward, and what looks good today is going to be out of date tomorrow. As a perfect example, if you look at the iPhone 1 versus the latest iPhone 6s that just came out, you have you have the same stuff, but it's completely different. Everything's been redesigned. They got rid of these skeuomorphic buttons like I talked about. Like if you look at the TV in the first one, it's like this old-fashioned TV, and the new one, it's just like a video icon indication. But you see things are changing, and what looks good today is going to be dated, next year, 2 years from now. So my best advice is to just learn the basics, because those will always serve you. Those will not change. But then keep up with change. Make sure you pay attention to design in the world around you and in the apps you use, because really we're all designers if we're building FileMaker screens. That makes us all designers, and we all need to pay attention to the visuals of the apps we're building. Just bear in mind, you're not trying to impress peers. You're not trying to impress anybody else. You're not trying to impress me. You're trying to make an app that is visually appealing and visually useful. And if you focus on that and you make sure that your customer understands why the app is designed the way it is, it's intentionally designed in this color, it's intentionally designed these ways, and that ends up being effective, then the customer will like it. And that's what matters at the end of the day, that it works for them and that it makes their business better. All right, I think that closes that out. Let's switch over to Q&A. Let me roll down the questions. If you have a question, now is the perfect opportunity to throw it in there about anything we talked about, or anything you want me to answer. Again, if I don't get to your question, shoot over an email to fba@dbservices.com and we'll get that answered. So let me browse through these really quick. How is the value of a color measured? That's a great question. The value of a color is measured by what that color what that color looks like when it's gray. So I actually have all right, let me pull up my demo file again, and I can kind of try to answer that question, how to measure how's the value of color measured. So in art school, they actually have you take a gray piece of paper and they lay it over you lay it over the color. So I actually kind of mimic this because I figured this might be something I'd want to talk about. But you can measure the value of a color by simply putting a gray next to it, and if the gray blends into the color, then you know that's what value the color is. So that's how you actually do it in art school. That's why a lot of selectors will have a gray next to it or be on a gray background, a lot of color selectors and a lot of apps. So that's the foolproof way to do it. You can try desaturating it in like a photo editing app, but you may not get great results. So that's how you actually measure it, and then you can kind of get an idea what color it is. You can take your app and desaturate it in an image editor and then see what it looks like black and white. That's also a great tool to see what kind of things are maybe blending together and what aren't without the colors. So hopefully that answers your question, David. Let's see. Yeah, the question, how did I gray out the background? I think I answered that hopefully already. Let's see. Yeah, someone asked if we'll have demos to download. We'll definitely share the video, and I'll see if I can get the demo file uploaded as well, so you guys can kind of tear it apart. Let's see. And just for reference, this is Jumpstart. It's a Start application that we distribute. So reach out to us if you have questions about that or can't find it online. Let me go down to the questions. There's a lot more questions coming in. Can I send the link for articles for autocomplete search and the modals? Yeah, autocomplete search is kind of, I'll just walk you through that real quick. It's basically you, on keystroke, it's an on keystroke trigger. You just run into find mode with that value that's in the field and do a find, and then you come back and put the user's cursor back where it was. So that's kind of all the autocomplete. And then the other autocomplete search that I did was on the light item level. This is just native to FileMaker. If you go into your inspector on the data tab, you can do autocomplete using value list. And you can just make that value list existing values as well. So hopefully that answers how to do autocompleting. I have a question coming in, ideas for dealing with long product lists with multiple variants. Yeah, I think you need some sort of selector still for that. You can make a little bit more of a detailed selector maybe with your variants. It's hard to say without the actual specs on that, but definitely selector is the way you're going to want to go if you have a lot of products. Is there a way to import vector icons? Something like Font Awesome offers. Yes, FileMaker 14 does have vector icons. Let me go back over to my other demo file. Yeah, these little icons here are vectors. They are the FileMaker 14 custom icons that you can get in a button. So you need a button object that I just pulled down from the layout menu. And then if you select that, by default, it has these options. And you can pick these. These are all vectors you see here. And then you can import your own. And you can get them up to 128 points. And then you can you can do anything to these. You can have hover states for the button color. You can have conditional formatting. There's a lot you can do with these SVGs that are really useful, and they are vectors. So just make sure that it's SVG format. I have articles on our website, dbservices.com, that talk about how to make custom and go into all the details, everything you need to know. If you have more questions about that, definitely check that out. So someone put a question in here. Let's see. Let me go down. Yeah, Derek asked, it looks like you're not utilizing any of the existing themes that come with FileMaker. Are you creating your own or to keep consistent with the buttons, fields, etc.? Yes, always make your own theme. You should start with a FileMaker theme that you think is useful. If none of them are helping, they're in here, the FileMaker themes. If none of these are kind of what you're going for, and you look at them all, then just use the minimalist theme, and that'll be a theme without a whole bunch of presets for every different type of object. So you can kind of build up your own theme from scratch. But I'm certainly using a theme in any application I'm building, because then if you need to change something, you can change it in like the click of a button application wide. There's no reason not to make sure your theme is always up to snuff. Is there a reference for screen sizes? Yeah, there's a reference for screen sizes. It's built into FileMaker again, right here. You have these presets, and you can set your own. So, for example, you could do 500 by 500. And if you click this, it then displays it, however many you have selected. So it just displays it in this orange box. So you can use that to your advantage and make sure that your layouts are always inside of that. And that will stay turned on as you flip between layouts. So hopefully that helps. Yes, FM Jumpstart is available for download. Let's see. Somebody asked about the real-time filtering again, and if that can work in WebDirect. I do believe it does work in WebDirect. And again, it's just a matter of saving where the user's cursor is. You go into find mode, you do the find, you go back to the original field, and you put their cursor back in it. And you just run that every time they type. That's really it. Again, you can probably download Jumpstart and look at the selector in there. Oh yeah, so somebody asked about the on the MBL screen why we got rid of the what I was doing with this blue line off to the side. So let me just show you that real quick. That was actually, I was going to talk about that a little bit, but this blue line was just kind of a fun thing that I did to add visual interest. We're talking about this line right here, and the idea was it's a shipping company, so they deal a lot with like ocean freight liners, and so I just wanted to include their culture in the app. So I did that with a really simple line that just kind of indicates the horizon of the ocean. So you can almost picture it like this is water. So you have like, if you had like the moon, you would have like, a reflection in the water, and it just kind of alludes to that really simply and really cleanly. I liked it. I thought it added something to the application. It did make it challenging, because then I had to make this color, this blue, like be contrasted to both of these blues, both background colors. So it did add a challenge, but I thought it was worth it, and I thought it added some visual interest, and the client liked it. So that's why we ran with that that line in the background that doesn't really line up with anything. Yeah, somebody asked for tips about iPad development. There's a lot of things to keep in mind. iPad development. My first tip is to research it. There's a lot of research done on what's really good for iPad, what's not. Mobile, specifically iPhone, is a big challenge because you need screens that look different. And FMGo is free for FileMaker, so there's a lot of demand for custom mobile apps. So it's kind of its own presentation to talk about how to design for mobile. Something I may do in the future here, but it's definitely a lot of things you want to keep in mind is just like keep it simple, make sure that the user test it on the iPad, make sure it feels good. and then make sure it's legible. If you're building an iPad system or an iPhone system, you definitely need to be testing it on the iPhone, see what it looks like, and then that'll give you a really good idea of where to go. So that's definitely step one. And then again, look at I do have one more tip on that. If you go over to my presentation, if you go over to resources, I have a couple of linked more resources. The first one is Apple UI design. If you click on this, it brings you to let me pull up the page. It brings you to Apple's all their guidelines for actually designing for iOS. And they will walk you through everything you need to know about what text size to use, how big a navigation part should be in an app. It goes into every single little detail, pixel size, fonts you should use, fonts you shouldn't use, colors to use. You can go through these guidelines, and everything you need to know is really here for the basics. Obviously, this is Apple's take on creating apps, so take it with a grain of salt, and you can definitely look at other resources. I do have Google. They have their own Android development ideas for material design and stuff like that. That gets really interesting. But if you kind of familiarize yourself with this, you can learn a whole lot about mobile really fast and use everything that Apple's done with all their research, and start your app there if you don't know what you're doing. Definitely start your app there. So hopefully that helps. This is just you can Google Apple UI design, basics, and this will pop up. Designing for iOS, Apple, whatever, and then it's also linked in my slide deck. So let's go through. All right. Somebody had another question, and I'm sure I'm not going to get to all these questions, but it looks like a couple more questions about the popover that I did on this screen. The popover that, oops, not that one. The payment popover where it kind of grays out the screen. Let's see. We have Paul asking why to use this and not a window popping up. You can have a modal window pop up, but that experience in my mind doesn't work very well on Windows, because Windows doesn't have separate windows within the FileMaker app. Like, they're all nested in the FileMaker app, and if you pop up a new window, it kind of breaks the full screen if somebody has full screen going on. So this is just kind of a cleaner way to do it. You see this a lot on the web, so people are familiar with it, and sometimes what you're building doesn't require a whole new screen. You just need a little pop-up dialog. So it's definitely keep in mind if you should be making a new window, but there are trade-offs, and also keep your target audience in mind, because sometimes if you're developing for Windows, again, a pop-up window isn't the best experience if you actually test it out. So, all right. Let me keep going down. Got a lot of questions about value, so hopefully those are answered. Suggestion for theme names and style names. Yeah, go ahead and name your theme something you'll remember. You can name it the name of your app. You can name it whatever. Custom themes will show up at the top of the FileMaker layout. FileMaker layout menu. So if we go to change theme, you see I have like Jumpstart theme new. So I have a couple of these in here that I was playing around with. But yeah, name your theme something that makes sense to you, and then make sure that you name the styles. Just kind of avoid putting color in the style. That's the main tip I can give you for naming styles, just because you may change the color. So if you say this is my dark blue button, and that's what I call it, then if I change it to dark red in this app or a different app, the theme kind of goes out the window because it's like named red, and I get confused. So I do that sometimes, as you see, but it really starts to get hard if you put colors in there. So try to name it what it is. So like this is the top tier active, etc. Hopefully that helps you with your naming. Naming is very important, so make sure you name your stuff. Tips for designing for WebDirect versus FileMaker. Again, a whole nother topic, but I will just say that in WebDirect you can run into issues if you stack a lot of objects and they're all visible at the same time. So steer away from that. And again, test on WebDirect. But yeah, there's whole articles and presentations we could do on that. All right, I'm gonna take one more question. What are, let's see, find a good question to end on. Let's just end on this question. What are your thoughts on slide controls? Slide control is basically the same as a tab, and it can be used very similarly. It's really good in most situations. Just always take slide controls and tab controls with a grain of salt if you're in a live development environment, because if you as a developer are going to be in and out of managed database, users will be, well, they'll be by default thrown on the first tab when you save managed database. So just always keep that in mind. First slider, first tab, it's the same thing. So in this version of FileMaker, definitely keep that in mind. If you are doing live development, if you're not, you don't really need to worry about that, and you can kind of use it for anything. But if it's like a matter of security, or you know, the user has to be on that tab, and if you switch them, bad things will happen. Just make sure there's not a whole lot of live development that's going to go down. So yep, that's my best advice there. So hopefully this has been really helpful. There's a whole bunch more questions that I didn't get to. So do please send those into the email. And thank you all for joining us today. Let me pull up my resources. Again, I just want to go over these resources. I talked about the first two. I also have a reference to Alexis Allen. She was a speaker at DevCon last year. She has a great blog she covers the visual design basics in depth. She goes into some that I didn't talk about today. She's got great tips that come out occasionally. Whenever she writes a new article, she's got great tips for designers. And like I said, we're all designers in FileMaker. And I'd just like to leave on, if you are out of ideas, if you're drawing a blank, you got writer's block for designing, pull up Pinterest or Google Images and just look up FileMaker dashboard, web form, something that you're trying to build, and just look at what others have made and try to draw inspiration off that. You'll get a lot of great ideas that you can incorporate.